Guten Tag. So, the idea for this video was originally a completely different one. I intended to make a top 10 invasion weapons list, but ran into a problem. I simply could not find 10 weapons I would consider viable for invasions, let alone top of the bunch in any way, unless I simply wanted to list all of the straight swords in the game. The problem lies in my definition of viable, and I had this discussion with Saint Riot numerous times, who makes the valid point that in invasions, a lot of weapons that are straight up bad in a duel setting become at least usable and in that sense viable in invasions where players are distracted, panicking or greedy. That is a fair point, but what I consider viable is a weapon that can consistently kill phantoms as well as hosts, even in the epic duel at the bonfire with Estus and Blues, and even against experienced players. And it is a sad fact of Souls games, and Dark Souls 3 in particular, that this litmus test will not be passed by all too many weapons, no matter how skilled you are, and the least so by big, heavy and slow poise weapons. Don't get me wrong, I love poise weapons, always have, and I consider having one in your inventory damn near mandatory for an invasion build, if only for swapping to it situationally. But a poise weapon that can hold its ground on its own in almost all scenarios? That's a tough call, isn't it? For the originally planned video, I played with a lot of weapons just to see what's what, and virtually all of them confirmed my worries of them being not up to the task. Even the Murakumo that is so beloved in the invader community fell short of my expectations. All it has is its running attack, and even that is no good against anyone who has learned the piss-easy roll timing against that. And there is no mix-up potential either, because again, the running attack and maybe R1 spam is all it has. At this point, I had already scrapped the plan for making a top 10 invasion weapon video, but one thought stuck to me. Is there really no poise weapon that is viable in my definition for invasions? Will I never be able to be one of the big boys with poise? Unless I just want to screw around, not minding if I lose half of my invasions? The gameplay footage you are watching right now might have already given away that I have indeed found what I was looking for. I will now, in all seriousness, claim that the Astora Greatsword is the best poise weapon in the game, and furthermore, that all the points speaking in its favor make it so good in fact, that it becomes one of the best weapons for invasions, period. And I want to emphasize that this has nothing to do with personal preference. I will give you that the weapon you are most comfortable with, that you're experienced with the most, and that you just like playing with might be your individual best poise or invasion weapon, and that is of course completely fine. But this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking hard numbers on paper, as well as substantiated considerations about the moveset. So let's get into it, shall we? First off, the Astora Greatsword avoids one of the biggest dilemmas poise weapons face. Ever since the poise patch in Dark Souls 3, you need a lot of armor poise to be able to actually, poise through stuff with your poise weapon. Which means you will need to invest a lot of points into vitality and maybe even sacrifice a ring slot or two for Havels or Wolfring. And this is aggravated further by the fact that most poise weapons are already extremely heavy to begin with. If your weapon weighs 20 units alone, how are you going to get a meaningful amount of armor poise on a soul level 125 build? The Astora Greatsword meanwhile, with its 8 units of weight, is among the most lightweight poise weapons in the game, meaning you can easily reach a healthy poise number without breaking the bank stat points wise, 37.61 being the least you should have. It is lighter even than the Hollow Slayer, aka the poise machine gun of death, and on top of that comes with the poise health of an Ultra Greatsword because, well, that's what it is despite its name. So you not only get a ton of poise health, but you do so also on your one-handed attacks, freeing your offhand for parrying or blocking. And talking about stats, Many heavy weapons need a ton of stat investment, usually strength, to use and get damage out of them. Where do you take those if you need to pump up vigor, vitality and endurance a lot to make use of them? Not an issue for the Astora Greatsword, because it has unusually low stat requirements with 16 strength and 18 dex. But that's not even the best part in this context. The best part is that it scales extremely well with elemental infusions, Dark being the one to go for obviously. So you get double A scaling in Dark, resulting in a considerable damage number just by having minimum strength and dex as well as 30 in both faith and int. And since it is so light and you don't need to waste so many points in vitality, you can probably even bump up strength and dex for a little extra boost. These 4 factors alone, low weight, ultra greatsword poise health, low stat requirements and high elemental scaling alone makes the Astora Greatsword the most efficient poise weapon in the game. Theoretically, you could make a point for the pickaxe here because that is even lighter and has great hammer poise health, which admittedly is huge. But with that weapon, you're pretty much limited to a heavy infusion and relying on Leo traits for damage output. And that might work in a duel setting and against inexperienced players and with a good connection, but in an invasion context I probably don't have to explain why I wouldn't consider the pickaxe efficient or effective in any sense of the word. You could also make a point for weapons with perseverance. Why use a poise weapon when you can give yourself true, if temporary, hyper armor just by clenching your arms together in front of your chest with a mace or cestus and call it a day? I will tell you why. Because if your opponents have more than 10 hours of PvP experience or just common sense, that might work once against them. And then they will just hit you once and roll away every time you press L2. If they know their shit even better, they might even backstab you for it. Perseverance is among the best weapon arts in the game, but at the end of the day is still a gimmick and does not a viable poise weapon make. So, again, this all combined makes me believe that the Astora Greatsword is indeed the most efficient poise weapon in the game. But what about effectiveness? The problems of poise weapons are not only their weight and stat requirements after all, but also that their moveset leaves a lot to be desired. All of them have slow and predictable swings, as well as no possibility to mix up the timings because they are all so easily countered by rolling backwards. All of them, and that includes the oh-so-beloved Murakumo and even the whole Greatsword class. All of them, with the exception of the Astora Greatsword. In my time with playing with it the past few days, I've come to the conclusion that the Astora Greatsword is, in a sense, the straight sword of the Ultra Greatsword class, meaning that virtually every single attack it has is useful and effective. What do I mean by that exactly? Let's start with the most important attack. The R1s, of course. Yes, they are slow and predictable, as with any other greatsword, but at least the Astora has among the longest reach in its class, which comes with a ton of reach to begin with. R1s won't do you much good against an evasive host rolling around the bonfire, but for swinging into a bunched up group of greedy gankers, the Astora's R1s are better even than the Murakumo, which has less poise health, does less damage, and has higher stat requirements, as well as higher weight. Then we have the R2. As with all R2s in this game, apart from those of straight swords maybe, they aren't all that important. But for what it's worth, it's an incredibly far-reaching poke with devastating damage output if fully charged. And while it may not be all that useful in general, it is still better than the R2 of the Murakumo or any greatsword. It admittedly loses to the Great Club R2, but if we're honest, that is all that weapon has going for it, isn't it? Running attacks, meanwhile, are a lot more important than R2s, and I found the one on the Astora to be astonishingly serviceable for what it is. It doesn't differ from the running attack of other ultra greatswords, but it still benefits from the exceptionally long reach of the Astora and its high damage potential through its great scaling properties. Not a move you want to base your whole strategy around. Certainly not as good as the running attack of the Murakumo, but also not bad for chase downs at all either. The Astora's weapon art, Charge, is famous for being probably the easiest move in the game to parry. But if you are aware of that and careful, it is also a devastating chase down and wake up option, giving this ultra greatsword an urgently needed fast attack to mix up timings and screw with your opponent's evasive maneuvers. I found myself using it a lot actually, something I can't say of pretty much any other weapon in the game. Speaking of mixing up timings and screwing with your opponents, let's get to this weapon's party piece, its rolling attack. As you probably know, the Astora's rolling attack, a quick overhead smash, is unique in the class, and used to be so powerful that the Astora was once considered a top tier tryhard weapon in the early meta of the game. The attack used to be unparryable. It did the damage of a fully charged R2 and it benefited from the Leo ring for reasons only Miyazaki understands. All those things have been fixed by now, which seems to have led many people to forget about this weapon. But other factors remain. The fact that the attack comes out very quickly, for example. Or that the poise frames on the attack start obscenely early, basically as soon as you press the R1 button after a roll. The fact that it has a shockwave effect. Or that even after being nerfed, it does still tremendous amounts of damage. And a lot of people don't seem to know that the move is now parryable. No one, not even the most adamant parry spammers, have tried it against me so far. Take all this and what you get is simply beautiful. A move on an ultra greatsword that is quick and devastating. One that catches even obviously experienced players by surprise in an invasion setting at least. A move that sees your attempt of chasing me down or roll catching me and just says no. That right here is the big thing. As long as you're using this weapon and have a decent amount of health left, there is no roll catching you or chasing you down. You shut that shit right down and you can do it over and over and over again, because unlike gimmicks on other weapons, this attack works consistently with nothing your opponent can do about it except rolling away and giving up his chase. This really was the moment where I recognized how powerful this weapon still is, and how far ahead of any other poise option it is. Having an actually good rolling attack is of a greater significance than you might think on the surface, and it is something literally no other weapon can offer. None. Think about that Murakumo rolling attack, or that of greatswords, or ultra greatswords that aren't the Astora. And tell me how often you make use of that. Yeah, I figured. So, in summary, the Astora Greatsword is not only the most efficient poise weapon in the game, but also one of the few examples where almost every attack it has is usable at worst, and annoyingly, for your opponent that is, powerful at best. And thus, it is an easy decision for me to call this weapon the best poise weapon for invasions by a mile, way ahead of anything else I could come up with. What do you guys think? Have I missed anything here? Am I being absurd? Because I think I just found a new love. Let me know what you think in the comments. And also have great holidays. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, a beastly black mass, or whatever it is you're celebrating. Nyff out.